Welcome to a new edition of the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino. On this episode, we talk with North Carolina-based author, podcaster, and marketer John Hinson. He hosts his own podcast called Our Weird World, as well as two others on behalf of the company he works for. He has also written and published more than 20 books on lesser-known historical people and events that you definitely have never learned about in history class. His writing has been praised as being helpful, irreverent, and humorous. In addition to his writing, John maintains Easy Waterfall Hikes, a database of family-friendly hikes in the Appalachian Mountains. Enjoy this interview.
Hey, thanks for taking a minute out today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for doing this.
Absolutely. Before we get into your life as an author, podcaster, marketer, I want to know, we've been going through quite a time with this pandemic over the last couple of years, and I'm curious, how did you do through it, and how did it change you?
Yeah, I mean, ironically, my wife is in the bedroom right now with COVID. So it's still here. Still a good reminder that we're still going through it. I mean, honestly, though, I was pretty fortunate that it did not affect me negatively. I know a lot of people, whether they lost jobs or, lost family members or whatever the case is. I mean, that really didn't happen for me. Honestly, the few months that I was able to work from home were like three of the best months of my life, because I'm a real big introvert. And so like you just tell me, oh, I don't have to leave my house, but I can still work and make money. Like I'm all for it. And so, that was pretty good to me. But other than that, I've been fortunate that it's been, life is normal for the most part.
It's crazy. I hear that so many times where people almost feel weird or like not even bad, but just strange saying that it was a time that they didn't mind, just based on their personality type, their work, you know what I'm saying? And I think there was a lot of this too, even though it's been really bad, I think there's been silver linings for a lot of people. Ultimately, the earth just slowed down. Everything just took a pause, and I think the way that our American society works is that we're just, always going, 99 miles an hour. So, it wasn't altogether a bad thing. So on paper, I understand what you do, and I'm going to get into that. But let's kind of get this to a more rudimentary level. If you were in front of a bunch of grade school kids at a career day, and one of the kids looks up at you and says, what do you do for a living, and how are you qualified to do that? How would you answer them?
Oh, man, at its most basic level, professionally speaking, I make lawyers less scary and more human than I think most people kind of see them as. And, it was something that I kind of fell into. I was never qualified to do it, I think, from day one, but it was something that I kind of jumped into. And over time, I've been doing it for, 7-8 years now at this point. So I think, just being in it long enough, I feel pretty qualified to talk about marketing and different strategies around that, especially in more white-collar kind of high-end professional service industries and stuff like that.
Talk to me a little bit about, take me through a day, because I know you're also an author. I know you do podcasting too. How do you parlay through your day and splice all of those out to meet, not only your needs, but what you want to do professionally and personally?
It goes back to just kind of the fortunate situation that I'm in, and it's good to, do things like this where I'm talking to you, because it allows me to kind of reflect and just kind of see, how fortunate that I am. But I'm in a position right now where I have a ton of flexibility so that I can marry kind of my personal interests with work and still kind of be able to balance the time to do both. And so like on any given day, I'm writing articles for our website. I'm hosting, the podcast that, we do as a company, and I'm also doing like all kinds of like education, whether it's like webinars or presentations or, preparing stuff like that. I'm also just kind of handling like our own internal marketing. So trying to find events to sponsor and coordinating those, or managing ad campaigns, and, kind of getting into the weeds of the actual marketing work. But at the same time, I also have some flexibility and some downtime to just kind of work on some of my own personal projects, whether that's the other podcasts that I host personally, or just some of the books that I'm working on. And so it's a really good balance.
So Our Weird World is what
Yeah.
you do, and I'm curious, I listen to a lot of different podcasts, and there's things in history, and there's things that are just out there that I just blow me away sometimes. Like, I have found out the other day from another podcaster that Gene Simmons literally owns the trademark to the word motion picture. Anytime that's used, he makes money. Now, he spent a lot of money to do it. So it's little things like that where you're like,
Yeah.
or just things in history that you just don't realize happen. Like, there was one podcast I was listening to a while back, and there was some representatives from South America. I can't remember exactly where, and they were the first ones to storm the Capitol. And they went in, and, they had metal detectors, they pulled guns out, and they were trying to fight for their country. It was kind of like their way of, storming the UN, so to speak, and get attention. But there's all these things, so I'm curious in what you do, looking at the way this world can be weird. What's one of the weirdest things that you had to cover or write about?
Oh, man. God, there's so many. There's just so many to pick from. I mean,
Yeah.
just, you talk, and just going through just kind of the things that I cover on the show. I mean, it's people who believe that they've encountered aliens and have been abducted by aliens, or it's, serial killers, and just weird little quirks that each one of them has, or it could be like a cult, and just some of the just mind-boggling things that they do. I literally just was talking about this with someone the other day. There was a cult up in New York, pretty basic run-of-the-mill religious cult, but the leader, John Humphrey Noyes, he basically came to believe that if everyone got together and just had unlimited amounts of sex, that they could create this force field that would make them immortal. On top of that, the community, once the cult kind of ended up dissolving, the community still stayed together, and they ended up producing a really popular silverware brand. And, maybe you or your parents are aware of the Oneida brand. That, it was responsible for half of all the silverware sales in the United States, in the 80s or something. And it was all born out of this weird sex cult.
Wow. That's wild, man. And those things happen so often. There's just, even the spiritual cults that believe that this said day, they're going to get ripped up and the rapture is going to happen. I mean, I was even listening to one about Scientology and about how every single office they have, and I know they have one in Kansas City, they just did recently downtown, every single office for all over the world has a desk with a pack of Kools and an ashtray and a lighter and a couple other things, a book and a quill. So when L. Ron Hubbard comes back, wherever he lands, he can go to that field office and smoke and write up. And I'm just like, dude, what, it's the audacity to get to that point where you really, I mean, I know there's some fanatical, fantastical things in this world, but right. It takes you to another place where you're like, you've got to be kidding me. There's no way that's happening. Yeah. And it is,
Yeah.
But it certainly makes this ride down here more interesting. That's for sure.
Yeah. And you talked about it earlier when you asked about COVID and how you hear about how a lot of people kind of express the same sentiment about how, they were kind of in a really fortunate situation. And one of the things that I've noticed, and this is one of the big reasons why I write the books that I do and why I do the podcast, is that if you just let yourself kind of believe everything that you see and hear in the media or online or on TV or whatever, you could easily believe that this is the worst that things have ever been. And and just everything is just in the process of burning down and that we're just so close to the apocalypse. And it's just like, not really. Like, if you look through history, you will see that things have always been really, really weird and messed up, and that comparatively, like, yes, we still have issues, but comparatively, like, in a lot of respects, things today have never been better. And it's just good to have that kind of perspective so that you don't get overwhelmed by just the sensationalism and, kind of propaganda that gets thrown at everybody every single day.
Yeah, dude, you're totally right, because I just think about things in history like, even in 1914, there was a lot more people that died. That level of Spanish flu is a different level of lethal, I think. Mm-hmm. And we didn't have certain things that we do have today. It's all relative, but I even think about, for a long time, and we probably come from similar generations where it's like, what were the most magnanimous moments in our history? We had the Challenger explode in 86. We had Reagan got shot. We had, 9/11. We had certain things, but nothing like this. And when we always hear about the World War II generation, whether they were actually in the war or they just lived through it as a civilian in this country, that was a momentous time of ups and downs that really shaped the way that they became called the greatest generation, and I've thought about that, especially with the youth. There has to be a level of resiliency that goes into these kids. My son specifically, he's special needs, and the two things that he loves the most is Major League Baseball and school. And when that all happened in March of 2020, I was like, what are we going to do? But I've been prepared as a special needs parent to kind of see things that are unexpected his entire life. But I was still thinking, what are we going to do? And what do you do? If you're that person that sees the glass half full, you adapt. We started getting into watching bowling on TV. And there was other things that we got involved with. But at the same time, I remember there's a level of them when you hear no or it's not going to happen, you roll with it. I remember right before this happened, we were watching a hockey game. And it was in San Jose, and there was a player that had an aneurysm and collapsed. And it was about a quarter into the game, and I came out of the room, and I was putting my son to bed, and I came out, and I told my wife, I said, they just canceled an NHL game, like a quarter into it. And she just kind of looked at me and said, like, what are you talking about? It was such an alien concept that one half of a game. And then we go into stretches and stretches of the entire planet getting closed down. Talk about relativity in a very short amount of time. So it's weird how life works, man. It's very weird.
Yeah, I agree completely.
So anyway, I jammed a whole lot in there, that one thought, but it's like, we are sitting on the precipice of history, and especially as people that are creators, this is the time to shine, the Bob Dylan moment, so to speak,
Yeah. And it's also, it's never been easier and more accessible for people and for people to get their voice out and to show off their creative abilities. And, there's a lot of good and bad that comes with it because, you have a lot of people with some very interesting opinions and they can often be the loudest voice in the room, which gets the most attention. But I think there's still the good that a lot of people are putting out there far outweighs, some of the bad.
Well, and I think at the end of the day, we have to realize there is this invisible matrix of karma that will somehow balance it out. It just, like I was listening to, a podcast about Nelson Mandela when he went to jail, and all of these things that he fought for, when he actually got released from jail, they happened. Can you imagine how shocking that would be in a good way? That everything you fought for and thought you were going to die for, even though it took decades, you came out and totally changed the landscape.
Yeah. Yeah,
and that's
for sure.
That's amazing. So let me ask you, you're a very motivated, driven individual with all of these things that you do and you're interested in. Writing, just alone writing takes an incredible amount of stamina and creativity. Are you originally from North Carolina, and kind of what was your childhood like? How did this all happen?
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Goldsboro, North Carolina. It's a military town, and it's I currently live in Charlotte. So Charlotte kind of on the western side of the state, Goldsboro on the eastern side. But I grew up in like a really, really strict, fundamental, really conservative kind of religious environment, and went to a Christian school like all through high school. And it was one of those things where it was like I was told that like the world was a very specific way, and it was a very scary thing that should you avoid all of this stuff. And then I went out and I went to a regular like public university. I went to East Carolina University, and as soon as I got there, it was like, oh no, the world is actually very different from how it was portrayed. And so almost immediately I felt like I was years behind where everyone else was. And so I spent kind of my 20s catching up, feeling like I had to catch up and just learn about things. I mean, even like, for example, like one of the biggest kind of shocks to me is like, I always grew up thinking that like a very small percentage of the population drank, and that like it was really just like the worst kind of seediest people who would go to a bar and drink. And then I get out and it's like, no, it's just like just a normal thing that people do. And especially now, like every town and every city, at least here in North Carolina, has like a craft brewery that everybody goes and hangs out at. And it's just a fun thing. And it's like, there's nothing scary about it at all. But like, I spent years trying to reconcile, like what I had been told was like not true at all. And that life, like there was just so much more to enjoy and take advantage of out in the world. And that ultimately is what kind of became the catalyst for why I ended up writing the books and doing the podcast and just really taking a deep dive and exploring the world and realizing like things just aren't as scary as you may have been led to believe.
Yeah, I remember, I grew up in the suburbs, and I'm more of an urban guy now. I moved into the city, and I remember there was all of those, fears that everybody had. Oh my God, you're moving into the city. And it's like, I actually feel like there's more of a bullseye on my back in the suburbs than I do in the city. It's just more magnified. It bleeds, it leads. It's just how they roll with the news,
Yeah.
Who would you consider a hero or role model for you?
Well, it sucks because like all of my early role models got canceled. Like I was a huge Bill Cosby fan growing up. I really loved his material, and then all of the rape allegations came out, and so he's not celebrated anymore. There was an author that he wrote travel books. His name was Bill Bryson. And I found some of his travel books, kind of in college, and I really enjoyed them. And that's what kind of inspired me to write the first couple of books that I did, which were more travel memoirs of me going out and kind of exploring the country and learning about, how everyone else lived around the world. And so, or at least in the United States. And so that was a really big inspiration for me. And then now I think one of the biggest people I look up to right now is a comedian named Dan Cummins. And he does a podcast called Time Sucks, really, really popular. And he, it's just him being passionate about knowledge and learning and making, trying to help other people just learn about things as well. And so, I think over time, especially with, like the Bill Cosby example, I think people, kind of inspire you at different times and you just kind of change and roll with it as time goes on. But, I think Dan Cummins for sure. He's a big inspiration.
It's a weird modern phenomenon that the cancel culture is just kind of taken, and it's not saying, oh, well, they're innocent. It's more of just that phenomenon where it's like at any point these people are just going to get snuffed out,
Yeah.
And we just don't know when that's going to happen. Are you familiar with the guy on PBS named Rick Steves that does travel stuff?
I've watched a couple of episodes. I haven't seen a ton of his episodes. I watched a lot of the Anthony Bourdain series, whether it was No Reservations or Parts Unknown. And then Bizarre Foods, which is more of a food show than a travel show, but watched a lot of those as well. I love them.
So Rick Steves, I was kind of watching and getting hip on him. I traveled with someone back in my younger days, and I actually went backpacking to Europe and flew out right before 9/11 and got stuck in Europe.
Oh, wow.
And I was actually in the back of a water taxi when 9/11 happened. So anyway, I ended up going to this place called Cinque Terre, which is the poor man's Riviera. And it's this old hippie commune, but it's beautiful. And Rick Steves was there. So we did all this research to find out things. And he was literally there filming a segment on like the 13th of September. It was totally bizarre.
Yeah.
You know, just to add to how magnanimous and weird that whole thing was, because, you know, you're stuck in Europe on 9/11, which actually was a good place to be.
Yeah.
But,
oh, yeah.
You know, but at the end of the day, so let me ask you this, and I may already have gotten your answer, but if you could meet anybody alive on the planet right now, who would it be? Who would you love to talk to?
Oh, man, that's tough. I mean, you know, yeah, I mean, like I said, Dan Cummins would be one for sure. I've seen him perform a couple of times, but didn't get to do a meet and greet. Yeah, I mean, that's the first one that comes to mind. I think if I had some time to really sit down and kind of think about all of the interesting people in the world, I would come up with some more. I mean, look, I'm a huge NASCAR guy, which might sound ironic given the fact that I'm an author and I have like a master's degree, which doesn't fall into the stereotypical NASCAR fan profile. But, you know, I would love to hang out with some of those people. My favorite pitcher growing up, I mean, I know you said your son likes baseball. I was a huge Randy Johnson fan growing up. I would love to just talk to him. He seems like a really interesting guy, especially now that he does a lot of photography in retirement. So yeah, those are just a few names that come to mind.
I was talking to my stepdaughter's boyfriend the other day. He's a big sports fan, and I was just going through some historical things because I heard a podcast about the longest baseball game ever. And it was like 31 innings. It was a minor league game back in 81. And Wade Boggs and Cal Ripken were minor leaguers at the time getting interviewed, and it was fascinating. But I was asking him if he ever saw the clip of Randy Johnson hitting that pigeon.
Yeah.
And he was like, oh, yeah, I saw it. So sometimes I'm not sure if the kids see it or not. But yeah, one of my favorite people on the planet was an old boss of mine. He was a NASCAR guy, and no one really would have suspected it. And
right.
I went to a race one time. They just opened the Kansas Speedway out here, and he gave me tickets. Yeah. And I have never been to anything like that in my life. Like, I just was like, all right, a bunch of dudes driving around on a track. Man, that thing rattled my bones in a way. I was totally, absolutely fascinated. I'd never been to a sporting event like that. Like, literally that fascinating, and I had no idea.
Yeah, and that's what I tell people is like, I mean, you know, watching it on TV, I get it. It can, you know, if you're not super invested in it, yes, on a surface level, it's just cars going around in circles. But man, if you go to an event, it's totally different. I mean, like you said, like there's nothing else like it. I mean, I think the closest you can come to is like maybe a really, really high energy college football game where it's like a big rivalry and the stands are packed. But even then, like it's still miles away, a difference.
Absolutely. So if you have a dream tonight and you run into your younger version, say in your 20s, and you could give your younger version a piece of advice based on the wisdom you've gained over the years, and this isn't a regret question, it's about you just accumulating knowledge, what would you tell your younger version?
Just, you know, that, you know, what you're pursuing is really fulfilling, but do it, you know, whatever your passion level is right now, double it. You know, because it was one of those things where like at the time there was a lot of trepidation and apprehension about it. You know, it was just me kind of writing as a hobby. It was just, here's a thing that I did or whatever. But like, I think if I had really like dived deep into it and really made it, you know, a bigger thing, like who knows how far ahead I could be right now with it. And so, I would just say like, you know, like really like just jump into this and really pursue it and really just go all in on it.
As a writer, was there an album or a book growing up that you always go back to that kind of like opened the doors for you?
Yeah, it was the Bill Bryson book. Ironically, I forget the name of it. I've got it downstairs, but it was essentially what it was he had grown up in Iowa and then moved over to England, but then he was preparing to move back to the United States, and he wanted to find basically the perfect small town to live in. And the book was just about him driving all around the country and just trying to, visiting all of these places and, trying to find the perfect place to live. And it was just one of those things that really, really inspired me. And it's one that I kind of go back to a lot when I'm writing, at least when I'm writing my travel stuff, and just, how he interjects humor, but also just the details that he provides of just what he's observing. And it's just, it was something that I really connected with and took off with on my own.
So everyone has a perception of you, your family, your friends, your readers. You live your life. You have a perception of you. Who do you think you are?
So that's really, it's great timing for this question, because I'm in a phase right now where I'm kind of questioning everything. And what I mean by that is a few months ago, I was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. And I grew up, growing up in Eastern North Carolina, there's really no such thing as like mental illness or mental disorders or anything like that. It's either, if you have a mental illness, you're just like the crazy naked guy running around yelling at nobody in particular, right? Or, as unfortunate as it is, you're, LGBTQ or whatever, and that's just how it's seen out there. There's no, ADD, depression, anxiety, none of that's, real for the most part. And so, I just kind of grew up thinking that, I'm just shy. I just have like a particular way of things and doing things and all of that. And, getting into my 30s, and I started realizing like, okay, maybe some of these things are adding up to something a little bit bigger. And then I finally get that diagnosis, and now it's just like, kind of looking back and just kind of seeing like, that's who I was, but no one, even myself, didn't really realize it. And so now, people are like, oh man, you're really difficult to like figure out what you're feeling or how you're thinking. I just can't, read your face, or, oh, you're like a machine. You just get so much done, but you're super quiet, or whatever the case is. And it's just, it's this transition phase right now where people used to see me as just a quiet, introverted person, but now with this kind of label, regardless of how you think about it, it's still just kind of the framework that people use to understand. It's okay, so this is who you are. And it also kind of explains why I've written 22 books over the last 7 years, because it's just like I'm able to just sit down and just get out all my thoughts and be able to go through this massive project process and put it out. And so it's getting comfortable with kind of that label and that understanding, but also finding ways to spin it and make something positive out of it, and being able to educate people and help people understand that, like, yeah, okay, someone with autism spectrum disorder doesn't necessarily mean it's a disability, even though that's kind of how it's classified, but it's just a different skill set that a smaller group of people possess, and just here's how I can help and how I can contribute to the rest of the world.
It's interesting. I've lived that my whole life with Miles, my son. He's 17, and he just got his first job, which was magnanimous, like unbelievable, on a lot of levels. Not that I didn't think he was going to get to that point, but my general mentality with him has been he can do anything that he wants to do. I've always, pushed him, not push, but I've always been like, we're going to do this, we're going to ride a bike, or we're going to do this, we're going to do that. But I look at all these kids that he grew up around and that have these spectrum, things that are going on, and they all are like, there's savant levels that go into it. There was one girl that he knew that literally for 3 years from this day, 3 years into the future, you could tell her your birthday and she would tell you what day it's on. She could just do it. And there's just other things that people can do. And, for Miles is a people person. People love him. They just absolutely he diffuses athletes, all the time. And he has that ability of doing that and connecting and making people happy. And I don't see it as obviously because I've lived it, I've been so close to it. I don't see it as something that is a negative thing. I see it as a neurological thing that needs to be embraced more and more by people, because that's just the way it is. We all have things that we have to deal with, and the only thing we're in control of is the love that we dole out. And if we decide not to do that, that's when we're the problem. And I think that's the problem with people that are different on this planet, is people don't open their minds up to that kind of thing. And it's unfortunate.
Yeah. And it's tough because it's the society and just kind of the frameworks for whether it's social interaction or, professions or anything like that. It's been built up in a certain way. And I think it's magnified when, people who are neurodivergent come along and they don't kind of fit into that framework, not because they lack abilities or anything like that, but it's just, their mind just works in a completely different way. And so it's one of those things where my hope, and I'm just in the very early stages of this, is kind of being able to use my experience and my own abilities to try to educate people and just kind of help understand, there's so many possibilities and skill sets and talents out there that can make everything so much better. And my ultimate hope is that, it's not seen as a disability or a disadvantage or negative or less than or anything like that, but it's just a different thing that people possess or just the way people are, and that, it's not being forced into a framework, but it's just more open and fluid, and that everybody kind of, fits in where their skill sets are and contributes to the best of their ability.
Without a doubt. So, John, where can anybody pick up your books, learn more about you, anything that you do in your world? Where's the best place to go?
Yeah, go to check out my website, johnhinsonwrites.com, Hinson. That's my central hub. That's where you can see the books. You can find the podcast. I also have a Waterfall website, because of course I do. And, just different waterfall hikes along the Appalachian Mountains, if that's your thing. And then also that's where you can find me on all the socials.
Right on. I got to say, my son, we have fountains. We have I think behind Rome, we're number 2 in the world for fountains. He loves fountains, loves that water. So I'd love to get him in front of some natural waterfalls, because I think he would just stay there for as long as he could. So it's a good thing on the brain for sure. Well, hey man, this has been great. Thank you for opening up. Good luck with everything. And I appreciate it, man.
No, thank you so much for having me on. I enjoyed it.
Thanks for tuning in to another famous interview with Joe Dimino, where we cover the world of art, literature, and music around the globe. If you want to hear more interviews, visit the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino channel on YouTube. Thanks again for listening, and until next time.